Tonight, while you are asleep, there is a trap sitting somewhere in Amish country that will kill more mosquitoes by morning than every electric bug zapper you have ever owned combined. No batteries, no electricity, no chemicals, just a jar, some basic kitchen ingredients, and a piece of knowledge that the pest control industry has spent years hoping nobody would ever put back together. They call it forbidden for a reason. Not because it is dangerous, not because it is illegal, but because if everyone knew how to build this for under $5, an entire industry built on $30 mosquito traps and $80 zappers and recurring yard treatment subscriptions would collapse overnight. I am going to show you exactly how to build it in the next few minutes. And I want you to understand something before we even get started. This is not a gimmick. This is not one of those internet hacks that sounds good in a video and does nothing in real life. This is rooted in actual mosquito biology, the same biology that pest control companies study and then deliberately avoid using against themselves, because a trap that actually works does not need to be replaced every season. So let's talk about why this works, why your bug zapper has been failing you, and exactly how to put this together tonight. You already know the feeling. You step outside in the evening, maybe to grill, maybe just to enjoy the last bit of daylight. And within minutes, you are slapping at your arms, your neck, your ankles. You go inside defeated. Maybe you turn on the bug zapper you bought 2 summers ago. You hear the occasional zap. You feel accomplished for about 10 seconds. And then you wake up the next morning with 3 new bites you do not remember getting. Here is what nobody tells you about electric bug zappers, and this comes straight from entomological research, not opinion. Studies tracking what bug zappers actually kill found that the overwhelming majority of insects caught in them are not mosquitoes at all. They are moths, beetles, and other flying insects that are harmless or even beneficial. Mosquitoes are not strongly attracted to ultraviolet light, which is what most zappers use as their lure. Female mosquitoes, the only ones that bite because they need blood protein to develop their eggs, are hunting for something completely different. They are hunting for carbon dioxide, for body heat, and for specific chemical signatures in human sweat. A purple light has almost nothing to do with how they find you. So your zapper has been killing months and lacewings and other insects you probably wanted to keep around, while doing almost nothing to the actual mosquito population biting you every night. That is not a flaw. That is the product working exactly as intended, to look impressive and sound satisfying, while quietly needing to be replaced or repaired every couple of seasons. The Amish do not use electric zappers. They never have. Their farms run without grid electricity in many cases, and yet their mosquito populations are managed effectively enough to keep livestock healthy, keep families comfortable in the evening, and keep their hives of honeybees completely undisturbed. How they pulled this off without a single watt of electricity is the entire foundation of what I am about to show you. The trap I am going to walk you through hunts mosquitoes the exact same way mosquitoes hunt you, by mimicking the precise combination of scent and chemistry that triggers their feeding instinct. Instead of lighting up a purple bulb and hoping something flies into it, this trap actively calls mosquitoes toward it from a significant distance, lures them inside, and then makes it physically impossible for them to leave. Here is everything you need, and I want you to notice the total cost, because this is the part that the industry really does not want spreading. A clean glass jar with a lid or a plastic bottle if that's what you have. Brown sugar. Active dry yeast, the same kind used for baking bread. Warm water. And a small piece of dark cloth or paper, ideally black or a dark color. That's it. Total cost, if you do not already have these items sitting in your kitchen, somewhere around $3 to $4. And one batch of this trap remains effective for about 2 weeks before it needs to be refreshed. Let me explain the science before we build it, because once you understand why each ingredient is there, you will be able to troubleshoot it, scale it up for a larger yard, or adjust it for particularly bad mosquito conditions. Mosquitoes locate their targets primarily through carbon dioxide detection. Every breath you exhale, every bit of heat your body radiates, creates a plume of carbon dioxide that drifts outward and tells a hunting female mosquito exactly where a blood meal is located. This is why mosquitoes seem to find you specifically in a crowd, or why they seem to know exactly where you are sitting on a porch, even in total darkness. They are not seeing you. They are smelling the carbon dioxide trail coming off your body. Yeast, when combined with sugar and warm water, undergoes fermentation, and the primary byproduct of that fermentation process is carbon dioxide. A huge amount of it released steadily over many hours. What you are building, essentially, is a small, continuously operating carbon dioxide generator. To a mosquito flying nearby, this jar smells exactly like a warm-blooded animal breathing. It does not know the difference. It cannot know the difference. The chemistry is identical to what its sensory organs are built to detect. This is the exact same principle behind commercial mosquito traps that cost $200 to $400 and run on propane tanks to generate carbon dioxide artificially. You are about to build the same core mechanism for a few dollars using kitchen ingredients. Now let's put it together. Take your jar and fill it about a quarter of the way with warm water, not hot. Hot water will kill the yeast before it ever gets to work. You want it warm to the touch, similar to bath water. Add about half a cup of brown sugar to the water and stir until it dissolves completely. The sugar is the food source. Yeast needs sugar to ferment and produce carbon dioxide, and brown sugar in particular contains trace minerals and a slightly different sugar composition that tends to produce a more robust fermentation than plain white sugar, along with a faint molasses scent that adds to the trap's effectiveness, since mosquitoes are also drawn to the smell of organic decay and fermentation, the same scent that leads them toward natural breeding sites. Once the sugar is fully dissolved, add 1 packet, or about 2 1/4 teaspoons, of active dry yeast. Do not stir it in vigorously, just give it a gentle swirl. The yeast needs to start working on its own. Within about 10 to 15 minutes, you will start to see small bubbles forming at the surface. That is the fermentation process beginning. Carbon dioxide is now actively being released from the jar. Here is a critical step that most people skip, and it is the difference between a trap that works and a trap that does almost nothing. Take your dark cloth or dark paper and wrap it around the outside of the jar, covering most of the glass or plastic, but leaving the opening at the top completely uncovered. Why does this matter? Mosquitoes are drawn to dark, shaded areas because that is where they rest during the heat of the day and where many species prefer to approach a target from. A jar wrapped in dark material visually signals shelter and shade in the same way a shadowy spot under a porch or a dense shrub does. Combined with the carbon dioxide pouring out of the open top, you now have a trap that is calling to mosquitoes on 2 separate sensory channels at once. Scent and visual preference, working together. Now for the final piece, and this is what actually traps them once they arrive. If you are using a jar with a lid, take the lid and either poke several small holes in it, just large enough for a mosquito to crawl through, but small enough to restrict easy flight back out, or skip the lid entirely, and instead stretch a piece of plastic wrap or a small piece of pantyhose material over the opening, secured with a rubber band, and poke a few small holes through that. The principle here is simple. Mosquitoes can fly in fairly easily through small holes when they are following a strong scent gradient pulling them forward. But flying back out through the same small hole, against airflow and without a strong directional cue pulling them, is significantly harder for them. Most that enter end up trapped inside, eventually exhausting themselves against the glass or plastic walls. If you want to make this trap even more effective, and this is something a few experienced homesteaders have refined further, add 1 additional element to the water before you add your yeast. A small piece of overripe fruit, or a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. Both add an additional fermentation scent layer that intensifies the carbon dioxide and organic decay smell profile, making the trap even more attractive at a distance. Once assembled, place these traps strategically around your property. The most effective placement is in shaded areas, near where you actually spend time outside, but slightly off to the side, not directly underfoot. Near the edges of your patio, along a fence line, near shrubs or under a porch overhang. Mosquitoes tend to rest in these shaded, humid microclimates during the day and patrol from them in the evening, so placing your trap directly in these zones intercepts them close to where they already are. For an average backyard, 4 to 6 of these jars spaced around the perimeter of where you spend time will create what is essentially a scent barrier, pulling mosquitoes away from your gathering area and into the traps instead. You will start to see results within the first 24 to 48 hours, but the trap becomes significantly more effective over the following week as the fermentation reaches a steady, consistent rate of carbon dioxide release. Refresh the mixture every 10 to 14 days. Once the fermentation has fully run its course, the sugar is consumed, the bubbling slows, and the carbon dioxide output drops, at which point it is time to dump it out, rinse the jar, and start a new batch. Now I want to address something directly, because I think it matters and I am not going to pretend otherwise. This trap will not eliminate 100% of mosquitoes on a large property, especially if you have significant breeding sources nearby like ponds, ditches, or neighboring properties with standing water. No single method does that, no matter what any product claims on its packaging. What this trap does extremely well is dramatically reduce the local mosquito population in the specific area where you place it, by actively pulling mosquitoes away from where you sit and toward where they cannot escape. Used alongside basic habits like eliminating standing water around your property, this becomes a serious and consistently effective layer of protection, not a single magic fix. This is also why the Amish never relied on just one technique. Their approach to pest management across the board, mosquitoes included, has always been layered. Multiple low-cost, low-maintenance methods working together rather than one expensive product promising to solve everything by itself. That layered thinking is exactly why their farms function without a single electrical pest control device and still manage mosquito pressure well enough to keep livestock, beehives, and families comfortable through the worst of summer. And this is precisely why the trap matters as much as it does to the people who do not want this information spreading. A $200 propane mosquito trap from a hardware store does the same fundamental thing this jar does. Burns fuel, in propane's case, to generate carbon dioxide, lures mosquitoes in, traps them. The company selling it is not selling you better technology. They are selling you the exact same biological principle, repackaged at a 60 to 80 times markup, with a recurring cost for propane refills built in for good measure. When you understand the actual mechanism, fermentation produces carbon dioxide attracts mosquitoes, a narrow opening traps them, you stop needing the $200 version. That is the part that gets buried, not because the knowledge is secret in some mystical sense, but because a $5 jar that works just as well as a $200 device is genuinely bad for business if too many people figure it out at once. There is also a quieter benefit to this approach that does not get talked about enough. Because this trap relies entirely on scent and a narrow physical opening, rather than electricity or chemical pesticide, it poses essentially zero risk to honeybees, butterflies, or other pollinators going about their business in your yard during the day. Bees are not drawn to fermenting sugar water giving off carbon dioxide the way mosquitoes are. And even if one were to investigate, the openings are sized specifically with mosquitoes in mind. Compare that to a yard chemical fogging treatment, which kills indiscriminately across every insect species it contacts, including the pollinators your garden and any nearby crops depend on. If you keep bees, or even just care about not wiping out the beneficial insect population working your garden for free, this matters enormously. Let me also touch on safety, because I think this deserves to be said clearly rather than glossed over. This trap uses food-grade ingredients you would find in any kitchen. There is no poison involved at any stage. If a pet or a curious child were to knock one over, there is nothing toxic in that jar, just sugar water and yeast. That is a meaningful advantage over chemical traps and sprays, where a knocked-over container or a treated area becomes a real safety concern that requires keeping kids and animals away for a set period. If you want to take this system further, here is the layered approach worth combining it with. Walk your property and eliminate any standing water you find, since that removes mosquito breeding grounds rather than just dealing with adults. Place several of these fermentation traps strategically around where you spend the most time outside. And if you want an additional layer specifically for the area immediately around your seating, a few potted plants known to have natural repellent properties like citronella geraniums or lemongrass placed nearby adds one more line of defense without adding any further cost or maintenance burden. Do all three together consistently, and you are looking at a level of mosquito control that most people spending hundreds of dollars a year on commercial products and treatments never actually achieve, because they are relying on a single method instead of a layered one. Here's what I want you to walk away with. The mosquito trap that actually works is not the flashy electric zapper sitting in stores marketed with bright purple light and a satisfying zapping sound. It is the quiet jar built around the same biological signal mosquitoes are already hunting for, carbon dioxide, paired with a simple physical barrier that stops them from leaving once they arrive. This costs a few dollars to build, takes minutes to assemble, runs without electricity, and poses no risk to your pets, your children, or your honeybees. The commercial version of this same mechanism has been sold back to you for decades at a massive markup, built on a principle this simple, that most people were simply never shown. Build a few of these tonight. Give it 48 hours. Watch what collects inside that jar by the time you check it, and you will understand immediately why this method earned the reputation it has. Let me also answer a few questions that come up every time someone tries this for the first time, because getting these small details right is what separates a trap that performs well from one that just sits there doing nothing. The first question is almost always about temperature. If your trap is not producing many bubbles after the first 20 minutes, the most common cause is water that was either too hot or too cold when you mixed it. Yeast is a living organism. Water above about 110 degrees Fahrenheit will kill it outright, and you will get no fermentation at all, no matter how long you wait. Water that is too cold will slow the yeast down dramatically, sometimes to the point where it barely activates. Aim for water that feels like a warm bath, comfortable to the touch, but not hot enough to be uncomfortable if you held your hand in it for a few seconds. If you are unsure, slightly on the cooler side is always safer than slightly too hot, because cold yeast will eventually wake up and start working, while yeast that has been killed by heat never will. The second question is about placement height. A trap sitting directly on the ground works, but elevating it slightly, even just 6 to 12 inches off the ground on a small stand, a step, or an upturned bucket, tends to perform better in most yards. This puts the opening closer to the height where mosquitoes are actively flying and searching, rather than down in the grass where ground-dwelling insects are more likely to interfere with it, or where rainwater is more likely to flood and dilute your mixture. The third question is what to do if ants find the sugar water before the mosquitoes do. This happens occasionally, especially if the jar has any drips or residue on the outside. Wipe down the exterior of the jar before placing it, and consider placing it in a small dish of water, creating a literal moat that ants cannot cross to reach the sugar source, while leaving the air opening at the top completely unaffected for mosquitoes to find. The fourth question, and one of the most important, is how to know the trap is actually doing its job rather than just sitting there fermenting harmlessly. Within the first 2 to 3 days, you should start to notice a small number of mosquitoes either resting on the outside near the opening or, more telling, actually inside the jar, unable to climb back out through the holes. If after 3 full days you see absolutely nothing, check that your holes are not too large, since an opening that is too generous lets mosquitoes wander back out almost as easily as they came in. A hole roughly the diameter of a pencil tends to be the sweet spot, large enough for easy entry, small enough to disorient an exit attempt. It is also worth mentioning what this method will not do, simply so expectations stay realistic. This is not a tool for clearing out a mosquito infestation overnight in a yard backing directly onto a swamp or a stagnant pond. In those extreme cases, you are dealing with such an enormous breeding population nearby that no single trap, jar-based or commercial, will fully solve the problem on its own. What this trap excels at is taking a normal residential yard with a normal, frustrating mosquito presence and meaningfully reducing it within the specific zone where you actually spend your evenings, which for the overwhelming majority of people watching this is exactly the problem they are trying to solve. One more detail worth knowing, particularly if you are dealing with an especially stubborn mosquito season. Doubling the size of the batch in a larger container, say a half-gallon jar instead of a standard mason jar, increases the surface area of fermentation and the total carbon dioxide output, effectively giving you a stronger pull radius from a single trap. This is a simple way to scale the method up for a larger patio or a yard with heavier mosquito pressure, without needing to place an excessive number of smaller jars everywhere. If this helped you, hit the like button, because it tells YouTube to put this in front of someone else who is still slapping at mosquitoes every evening without knowing there was ever a better way. Subscribe if you want more of this. Real methods, rooted in real biology, that do not require spending money every season to keep working. Next time, I am going to show you the ancient powder sitting in almost every kitchen that wipes out an entire ant colony at the source. Not just the ants you can see walking across your counter, but the colony itself. Pest control companies hope you never connect the dots on this one either. I will see you there.